There are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind. C.S. Lewis. But to reach them, sometimes God must tear us away from what's familiar, even from what once felt like love. So if you're reading this today, it's not by accident. This message is for you, the one who was targeted, the one who was used, and the one who still sometimes questions. Did any of it matter? Did they even care? Will they ever be held accountable? This is your answer. And you need to hear it right now. When you couldn't fight back, God took over. There are certain battles in life that don't begin with a clash of swords, but with the quiet ache of betrayal. There are wars not fought on visible fields, but in the soul. Invisible, exhausting, and sacred. And perhaps the hardest part of all is that no one else sees the bruises. No one else hears the gaslighting words echoing through your memories, distorting your peace. No one else fully understands why you wake up with a weight in your chest that never quite goes away. Because how do you explain that the person who held your hand in prayer also pierced your soul with manipulation? That the one who said, "I love you," also used that love to control, to shame, to dominate? You tried to hold it together. You told yourself it wasn't that bad. You looked for the good. You blamed yourself. You convinced yourself that if you just prayed harder, forgave more, stayed longer, gave more grace, somehow they'd wake up and love you right. You didn't just love them. You held them up, defended them, carried their sins as if they were your cross. You gave and gave until there was nothing left of you but a hollow echo of the person you used to be. And in those final moments, when you were gasping for peace and starving for truth, you learned something the hard way. Narcissists don't break your heart, they break your spirit, slowly, deliberately, systematically, and they call it love. But the heavens were not blind. The angels heard what the world ignored. And the God who numbers every hair on your head was there in every room, every argument, every night you cried yourself to sleep and whispered, "Lord, do you see me?" Yes, he did. And that's why this part is so important. When you no longer had the strength to fight back, God stepped in, not just to defend you, but to claim you. Because to him, you were never disposable. You were never too emotional. You were never too needy. You were his. What you didn't realize is that long before you broke, long before your heart collapsed under the pressure of carrying someone else's cruelty, God had already been intervening. Not with thunder, not with lightning, but with divine precision, protecting your sanity when it was under attack, holding your soul together when someone else was trying to dismantle your identity. You thought you were barely surviving, but in truth, you were being held. That's what grace does. It doesn't always look like power. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes it looks like staying silent when the narcissist is shouting to control the narrative. Sometimes it looks like crying alone in the car, but still showing up for work. Sometimes it looks like saying nothing, even though you know the whole truth. And in that silence, God was roaring. You thought you were abandoned, but you were never alone. The pain you endured became sacred ground, a holy battlefield where the Lord himself fought for your soul. You couldn't see it then, but every time you chose not to retaliate, every time you refused to become like them, every time you surrendered your pain to God instead of turning bitter, you were proving who you were. Because God doesn't just watch, he responds. But he doesn't respond with petty vengeance. He responds with justice born from love. Justice that heals the wounded while holding the wicked accountable. And now, beloved, your story is shifting. They may have gotten away with mocking your heart. They may have convinced others you were the problem. They may have walked away with your tears still on their hands. But they didn't walk away from God, and he does not let the righteous cry out forever without reply. The word says in Psalm 34:18, "The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." That was you. But now your soul is no longer crushed. It is rising, not in anger, but in sacred dignity. And God is not just healing you, He is taking over the battle you were never meant to fight alone. You are not weak because you reached your limit. You are not faithless because you collapsed under the pressure. You are human and you are loved. And just as the Lord delivered Israel out of the hand of Pharaoh, He will deliver you from the psychological chains of that narcissist. You will not die in the wilderness of their control. You will not be buried in the shame they tried to place on you. Because when you had nothing left to fight with, God said, "Now let me fight for you." You don't need to prove your worth to them anymore. You don't need to fix what they broke. You don't need to wait for an apology that may never come. Because God saw what they did, and He's already begun to write their consequences and your restoration. So, hold on, not to the memory of what was lost, but to the truth of what's coming, because the moment you couldn't fight back was not your defeat, it was your deliverance. And the one who saved you is not done speaking yet. God exposes what they hid behind the mask. The hardest thing about being manipulated is not the betrayal, it's the confusion. It's the feeling of being lost inside your own reality, questioning whether what you saw was true, whether what you felt was justified, whether your pain even counts. Because the narcissist didn't just lie to you, they rewrote your memories. They planted seeds of doubt so deep that you began to water them yourself. And that is spiritual warfare at its most personal level. They wore kindness like a costume. They performed empathy when it benefited them. They paraded false humility before others, while privately crucifying your confidence behind closed doors. They smiled in public and snarled in private. And because you believed in second chances, because you believed in love, you tried to reconcile those contradictions over and over until you felt like you were the one unraveling. But here is the truth no one told you. God never asked you to carry that contradiction. He never asked you to carry someone else's unrepentant darkness as your cross. He never called you to spiritual codependency masked as sacrificial love. That was never His plan for you. What God does, in His time and in His way, is reveal what's been hidden. He exposes what you were never meant to live under. And He doesn't do it to shame them. He does it to free you. You see, the narcissist built their power on image. They curated a version of themselves that was likable, successful, sometimes even godly. But God doesn't see as man sees. He looks not at the performance, but at the heart. And when the heart is full of deceit, full of pride, full of the desire to control others for selfish gain, God eventually turns on the spotlight. At first, it happens in small ways. A friend of theirs sees through a lie. A co-worker no longer buys the charm. Their circle begins to shrink. Their control begins to slip. Their words lose influence. And slowly but surely, the mask begins to crack. Not by your hand, but by God's hand. Because the same God who tore the veil in the temple is the God who tears the veil off false appearances. He doesn't just whisper the truth in your ear. He declares it before those who once doubted you. Let this be clear. God is not in the business of letting wolves wear sheep's clothing forever. Eventually the teeth show. Eventually the lies catch up. Eventually the web they spun to trap you becomes the net that catches them. Because no one builds a kingdom on deception without facing the collapse. But what's beautiful, what's holy, is that God allows you to witness this exposure, not out of vengeance, but out of confirmation. He lets you see it so you'll know you weren't crazy. You weren't overreacting. You weren't too much. You were discerning. You were accurate. And you were trying to love someone who was determined to stay broken. Somewhere along the way, they started believing that if no one else could see the damage they caused, then it must not be real. But God always sees. He always knows. And what they tried to hide from the world, He will reveal. Sometimes privately, sometimes publicly, but always perfectly timed. And in that moment, you will not feel the triumph you thought you would. You will feel a strange silence in your soul, a peace, a letting go, because suddenly you won't need closure anymore. Not from them, not from anyone. You will have confirmation that God was with you the entire time. That truth was never lost. It was simply waiting to be unveiled. So if you're still waiting for the truth to come out, trust that it is on its way. If you're still aching because they're admired, celebrated, and believed, while you are left with nothing but your pain, hold on, because God is not done yet. For nothing is secret that will not be revealed, nor anything hidden that will not be known and come to light. Luke chapter 8:17. He will finish what He started, and when the truth rises, it will not come through your effort, it will come through His sovereignty. So walk in dignity. Keep your hands clean. Let God be your vindicator. He knows how to tear off a mask without lifting a single finger of your own. And if this word resonates with you, speak it out loud, even in a whisper, and declare, I am not crazy. God saw what they did, and He will bring it to light. Comment below with the words, He saw it all. Let every lie that was spoken over you be broken today. God makes them feel the void they created in you. There is a strange silence that follows the final goodbye. A stillness so deep, it almost feels unnatural. You wake up and realize there are no more games, no more text to decipher, no more emotional roller coasters, and yet there is grief. Grief not only for what they did, but for what you believed it could have been. You didn't just lose a person, you lost a story, a hope, a vision of love that was never real, but still felt real enough to hurt. For a while, you wonder if they feel anything. You imagine them moving on with ease, laughing, while you're still picking up the pieces. You question if they ever loved you, and if they didn't, then what does that say about you? Were you just a placeholder, a utility, a mirror for their ego? But this is where the mercy and mystery of God begins to unfold in ways you didn't expect. Because you see, when God removes someone toxic from your life, especially someone who fed off your light, He doesn't just end the chapter. He writes the consequences into the next one. Narcissists are not wired to feel remorse in the way healthy souls do. They do not miss you for your heart, they miss you for your usefulness. They don't long for reconciliation, they crave access. They do not regret hurting you, they regret losing control over you. But when God intervenes, He does something they cannot understand. He takes away the supply, and when you, the empath, the giver, the steady presence they always assumed would be there, finally walk away under God's protection, they feel something unfamiliar. It creeps in, slowly at first, a silence in their phone where your support once lived, a mirror that no longer reflects their ego back to them. A moment of success they want to share, but realize they burned the only bridge that ever truly cared. And then it grows. God lets them feel the void they worked so hard to pretend didn't exist. He lets them search for replacements and find only shallow waters. He lets them sit in rooms full of admirers and feel nothing. Because no amount of attention can replicate real connection, and no crowd can fill the hole left by someone who loved them despite their brokenness. But it's not just that they miss you, it's that God makes sure they can't reach you anymore. That's the part they didn't anticipate. They always thought they could circle back, charm their way in, gaslight their way out of accountability. But when God closes a door, it is sealed by divine hand, and no manipulation, no tears, no sudden performance of repentance can pry it open. God doesn't just rescue you, He fortifies you. He builds spiritual walls around you that echo with truth. And those walls are not made of bitterness, but of wisdom. You learn to see clearly. You learn to protect your peace. You stop needing closure because your healing doesn't depend on their remorse. It rests entirely on God's faithfulness. Meanwhile, they begin to experience the slow, quiet erosion of everything they thought they could control. Relationships around them start to mirror the chaos they once caused in you. People walk away, trust decays, reputation fades, and inside it all, there's an ache they can't explain, because they don't know what it's like to feel loss until it hits their pride. And here is the divine irony. They cannot even name what they've lost, but they feel it. They feel the lack of peace. They feel the absence of safety. They feel the difference between the unconditional love you gave and the transactional love they receive from others now. You were a sanctuary, a refuge, a voice of reason, a steady presence in the storm of their own making. And now, that sanctuary is gone, not because you failed, but because God said, enough. And when God removes His child from someone's life, it's not just an exit, it's a verdict. But the most powerful part? You don't have to witness any of this. You don't have to watch their spiral or track their regret. You don't have to wonder if justice is being served. Because when God makes someone feel the void they created, He does it privately, deeply, and with intention. Not for your satisfaction, but for their transformation, if they choose it. And for your protection, because you deserve it. That void was never meant for you to fill in the first place. You are not responsible for healing someone who refuses to be honest. You are not the answer to their emptiness, and you are no longer their possession. God removed you to remind you that your worth was never determined by their recognition of it. And now, as they stare into the echoing silence, as they search for what they threw away, they will feel, sometimes for the first time, the magnitude of what they lost. Not just a partner, not just a friend, but a soul created by God that they tried to manipulate and could never truly destroy. God makes them reap what they sowed in their own language. There's something humbling about the way God delivers justice. It never looks like vengeance in the way we imagine it, loud, explosive, immediate. No. God's form of justice is quieter, deeper, and far more personal, because He doesn't just strike the surface, He goes straight to the root. He doesn't just punish, He teaches. And when it comes to the narcissist, someone who thrived by turning your heart against itself, God responds in a way they cannot escape. He speaks to them in the very language they used to hurt you. You see, narcissists do not feel guilt the way a compassionate soul does. They do not lie awake, wondering how they made you feel. What keeps them up at night isn't remorse. It's the slow unraveling of control. They do not miss people, they miss power. And so, when God acts, He doesn't simply inflict pain. He disorients their illusion of invincibility. If they used silence to punish you, God surrounds them with silence. Not peace, but emptiness. Their messages go unanswered. Their charm falls flat. The echo they once relied on to feed their ego no longer returns. If they gaslit you, made you question your memory, your worth, your reality, God lets confusion enter their own world. Deals fall through, friends withdraw, their once solid ground starts to shift. Suddenly, they can't tell what's real, what's stable, what's secure, and no one is there to stabilize them. If they betrayed your loyalty, if they took your commitment for granted, God surrounds them with people just like them. People who smile with empty eyes, who use flattery as bait, who offer attention but no depth. And the narcissist for once becomes the one being played, and they can't make sense of it. Not because they've changed, but because they've met a reflection of their own dysfunction. And it's terrifying. And if they belittled you, if they made you feel like your voice didn't matter, like your value was negotiable, then God strips them of the influence they once used as a weapon. Their words lose weight. Their name loses respect. And the authority they abused becomes the very thing that crumbles beneath their feet. It doesn't happen overnight. God is too masterful for that. He lets the narcissist walk into the very traps they once set for others, not because he enjoys their suffering, but because he is holy, and he knows that some hearts must be broken before they can be humbled. It is one thing to be judged by people. It is another thing entirely to be judged by silence, by the absence of the voice of God, by the quiet realization that the access they once had to someone good, to someone real, to someone chosen, is now gone, not because you took revenge, but because heaven took notice. And all of this, it happens without you lifting a hand, without you speaking a word. Because when God begins his work, he ensures that no fingerprints of yours are on his justice, so that even if they try to blame you, they can't. Because the consequences they face have nothing to do with you anymore. They are reaping what they sowed, and the ground they sowed it in was hardened by pride and watered by deceit. What's most sobering is that the narcissist never thinks the harvest will come. They think they are immune, that their intelligence, charm, or manipulation will protect them. But God is not impressed by performance. He sees the intention behind the act. He weighs hearts, not reputations, and no platform is high enough, no image curated enough to shield anyone from the law of sowing and reaping. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Galatians 6:7. So when you wonder if they'll ever face the pain they caused, know this, they already are. Not in a way you can always see, but in ways that matter, in their restless spirit, in the relationships they can't keep, in the loneliness they can't explain, in the eyes of people who look at them with the same mistrust they once projected onto you. God does not need lightning bolts to teach lessons. He simply lets truth play out. He lets the mirror turn. He lets the mask slip. He lets the soul feel the emptiness it once forced upon another. And in that space, that quiet reckoning, the narcissist is finally faced with something they cannot manipulate, the truth. Not your version, not their version, but God's version, which sees everything, forgets nothing, and returns exactly what was planted. And so, the narcissist begins to understand, not because you explain it to them, but because life, under God's hand, has become the teacher they never wanted, but now can't ignore. God lifts you up in front of those who tried to tear you down. There is something sacred, almost unbearably holy, about the way God restores those who have been broken by betrayal, because he does not simply glue you back together. He reshapes you. He does not return you to who you were before the pain. No, He brings forth the version of you that only the fire could refine, the version of you that never needed their approval, the version of you that is not afraid to be seen, not afraid to walk away, not afraid to rise. For so long, you lived under the weight of someone else's narrative. They wrote your character as unstable, overreactive, too emotional. They told their story first, to family, to friends, to mutual connections. They painted themselves as the victim and you as the storm. While you stayed quiet out of dignity, they performed false humility. And when you wept in silence, they stood in rooms laughing at your expense. And yet, God kept you hidden, for a time, because when He restores His children, He does it in stages. First, He brings you back to yourself, piece by sacred piece. He cleans out the lies they planted in your mind, that you weren't enough, that no one else would want you, that your kindness was weakness. He sweeps those lies out like dust from the temple. Then He begins to rebuild. Gently, quietly. He restores your sleep. He strengthens your boundaries. He puts laughter back in your lungs. Not the kind you fake to survive, but the kind that erupts from joy you didn't think you'd feel again. And then, when the time is right, He lifts you. But not in the way the world defines success. He doesn't place you on a pedestal to be applauded. He doesn't parade you in front of others with noise and fanfare. No. He places you in purpose, in stability, in truth. He blesses you in ways that cannot be manipulated, cannot be faked, and most importantly, cannot be taken away. And it's here, in this holy stillness, that the narcissist sees you again. Not because you went looking for them, not because you needed validation, but because God arranged the moment. The one who once dismissed your tears now sees you speaking with clarity and calm. The one who mocked your dreams now watches you walk in the fruit of prayers. They didn't believe you'd survive long enough to see. The one who tried to destroy your name now witnesses your honor being restored by the very hand of God. They see you, but they cannot touch you. They remember who you were, but they cannot recognize who you've become. Because what God built in the wilderness was not for their consumption. It was for your calling. This is divine reversal. God doesn't just remove you from the pit. He places you in rooms they tried to keep you out of. He puts peace in your home. He surrounds you with people who see your value without having to be convinced. He allows your name to be spoken in places of honor where their name is no longer welcome. This is not about revenge. It's about restoration. And restoration is always public, not because God wants to humiliate others, but because He wants to redeem the truth that was buried. And there's more. The people who once believed the lies about you, they begin to question. They see your fruit, and it doesn't match the story they were told. They remember what was said, and it no longer makes sense. Because truth has a way of rising, not quickly, but inevitably. And once it surfaces, no lie can survive its presence. That's why the lifting of God is so powerful, because it requires no defense, no explanation, no speech. It's simply your existence, thriving in wholeness, that undoes everything the narcissist tried to plant. And here's the irony they never saw coming. They thought you were weak because you stayed. They thought you were broken because you cried. They thought you were finished when you walked away. But God knew something they didn't. You weren't done. You were just getting started. You see, they underestimated the power of a soul held by God. They thought they had the final word. But they never understood. God always writes the last chapter. And He's writing it now with every blessing in your life, every moment of peace, every door He opens that they can no longer close. With every person who sees the real you now and honors you rightly. With every sunrise where you no longer wake up in survival mode, with every night where you rest in peace instead of fear. That is what it means for God to lift you. It is not always loud, but it is unshakable. It is not always visible to the world, but it is undeniable to those who try to erase you. And in that silent, radiant justice, they will know, without a word from your lips, without a hint of bitterness, without one single effort to prove anything, they will know. You are the blessing they rejected, and you've become everything they said you'd never be, not in spite of the pain, but because God turned it into purpose,